The Mafia boss chuckled when a Latina woman claimed she could speak 10 languages. But when she responded in flawless Italian, his expression turned to stone. He was utterly speechless. Hey, before we dive in, drop your city in the comments below. Then kick back, relax, and get ready for a killer story. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new one. The hush that fell over Vuvio's private dining room was immediate as Don Vittorio Moretti entered. Even the most seasoned capos lowered their gaze as he passed, the weight of his family name commanding respect without a single word being uttered. At 33 years old, he embodied the legacy of 3 generations of power, evident in his purposeful stride and the impeccable Brioni suit that accentuated his athletic build, not to mention the heavy gold signet ring, emblazoned with the Moretti crest. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice calm, yet carrying to every corner of the room. He never needed to shout. Those who failed to heed Vittorio Moretti's understated commands rarely lived long enough to repeat the mistake. His consigliere, Marco Bianchi, a 60-year-old with shrewd eyes that had borne witness to decades of family affairs, offered a respectful nod. "Don Moretti, we were just discussing the situation regarding the Calabrese territory." Vittorio unbuttoned his jacket and took his seat at the head of the table. 2 bodyguards positioned themselves by the door, their suit jackets struggling to fully conceal the weapons they carried. These were essential precautions in times like these, with tensions between the 5 families escalating by the day. "The Calabrese need to understand their place," Vittorio stated, accepting a glass of 18-year-old Macallan from a visibly nervous waiter. "Their recent attempts at expansion are unacceptable." Everyone present knew precisely what those expansion attempts entailed. 3 of Vittorio's businesses had been approached with threats. One of his most trusted capos was discovered in the Hudson River, a chilling Sicilian message left for the Moretti family. The room seemed to grow several degrees colder as Vittorio's dark eyes slowly scanned the faces around him. "Franco," he said, addressing a broad-shouldered man at the far end, "I want you to set up a meeting with their underboss. Remind him of our agreement." Franco nodded, his understanding clear. No explicit instructions were necessary. In their world, problems were resolved permanently, and discussions took place behind closed doors. The consequences of those discussions frequently made their way into the morning papers, though never with any traceable connection to the Moretti family. "Now," Vittorio continued, setting down his tumbler, "I believe we have more pressing matters to discuss. The Duca situation." The mention of the Duca family, Chicago outsiders attempting to gain a foothold in New York, sent a ripple of unease through the room. Their underboss had been extending offers to several key business owners within Moretti territory. "They're getting bold," Marco remarked. 2 restaurants on Mulberry Street received visits yesterday. "They're offering protection at half our rates." Vittorio's expression remained impassive, but those who knew him well could detect the dangerous glint in his eyes. "An introductory offer, then one that would bankrupt them unless they planned to eliminate the competition." He paused. "Us." The meeting proceeded with reports from each capo regarding their respective territories, tribute collections, and encounters with law enforcement. Vittorio listened attentively, interjecting with occasional questions while making mental calculations. The Moretti empire was extensive, encompassing construction firms, waste management companies, luxury import businesses, upscale restaurants, and countless other ventures that generated millions in both legitimate and illicit revenue. Every detail demanded his attention. As the meeting drew to a close, Vittorio rose to his feet. "I have dinner with Judge Harrington tonight. Marco, you'll accompany me. The rest of you are aware of your assignments." The men stood respectfully, none daring to turn their backs on the boss as they filed out. Only after the last capo had departed did Vittorio allow his shoulders to relax slightly. He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, a $120,000 timepiece that had belonged to his father, noting that he had 2 hours before his meeting with the judge, who had been instrumental in dismissing charges against 3 of his captains the previous month. Sir Antonio, his personal driver and security chief, appeared at the door. "Your car is ready. Did you still want to stop at Rossi's before dinner?" Vittorio nodded. Giovanni Rossi was one of the few remaining old-world tailors in the city, and Vittorio had commissioned a new suit for his sister's wedding the following month. Family obligations never took a back seat, even amidst power struggles between criminal empires. The black Mercedes S-Class glided through the Manhattan traffic, its heavily tinted windows obscuring the three men inside. Vittorio in the back, Antonio driving, and Salvatore, another bodyguard, in the passenger seat. The car's customized interior boasted Italian leather and bulletproof glass, a standard precaution for a man of Vittorio's standing. Rossi's fine tailoring occupied a small storefront on a tree-lined street in Little Italy. As they pulled up, Antonio surveyed the area before opening Vittorio's door. The ritual was well rehearsed. First, Antonio would exit the vehicle, then signal Salvatore, who would escort Vittorio inside. Regardless of how mundane the errand might be, the boss never moved without protection. The bell above the door chimed as they entered the small, elegant shop. Giovanni Rossi, a diminutive 70-year-old with hands still steady enough to execute the most delicate stitches, hurried forward. Don Moretti, it's always an honor. He bowed slightly, old-world manners never forgotten. Your suit is ready for the final fitting. As Vittorio followed the tailor, a young woman emerged from behind a curtain, her arms laden with fabric swatches. She nearly collided with Salvatore, who instinctively reached inside his jacket. Perdoni, she exclaimed, taking a quick step backward. She couldn't have been older than 25, with caramel-colored skin and dark hair pulled back in a neat, professional bun. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of the imposing men. Giovanni rushed back, visibly flustered. My apologies, Don Moretti. This is Miss Vega, my new assistant. Isabella, please be careful. This is a very important client. The young woman regained her composure quickly, switching to perfect, unaccented English. I'm so sorry for the interruption, sir. Please excuse me. Vittorio found himself studying her with an unexpected level of interest. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was the poised intelligence in her eyes that truly captivated him. He waved Salvatore back with a subtle gesture. No harm done, Miss Vega. His voice was softer than usual, curiosity temporarily eclipsing his typical guardedness. Isabella is a miracle worker, Giovanni explained proudly. She speaks 10 languages. English, Italian, Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, French, Arabic, Portuguese, Japanese, and German. She's assisting me with my international clients. Vittorio raised an eyebrow, skeptical. 10 languages? That's quite an accomplishment for someone so young. A small, confident smile played on Isabella's lips. Her Italian was flawless. Il uomo che esse molte lingue val quanto uomini. She quoted the old saying that a man who speaks many languages is worth many men, delivering it with perfect Sicilian intonation. Vittorio nodded, impressed despite himself. And do you find that to be true, Miss Vega? He inquired, still speaking in English. She met his gaze directly, something few people dared to do. I believe understanding different languages provides insight into how people think. Sometimes what's not said is more important than what is. There was an almost challenging quality in her tone that piqued Vittorio's interest even further. People didn't challenge him, not even subtly. Before he could respond, she added something that sent a chill down his spine. La famiglia è tutto, Illinois sang non è acqua, she said quietly in Italian. Vittorio felt his entire body tense. The phrase, family is everything, blood is not water, wasn't just any Italian saying. It was a part of the sacred oath sworn by made men in the Moretti family, passed down through generations. It wasn't something that any tailor's assistant should know, let alone casually recite to the boss himself. Giovanni, oblivious to the phrase's significance, beamed with pride. See? Perfect accent, too. Isabella, please bring the blue silk samples to the fitting room while I attend to Don Moretti. As she turned to leave, Vittorio caught her eye once more. Something unspoken passed between them. She knew that he had recognized the phrase's significance. Instead of fear, he saw only a calm acknowledgement in her expression before she disappeared behind the curtain. Antonio, Vittorio said quietly, find out everything you can about Miss Isabella Vega. Everything. His security chief nodded, already reaching for his phone. Vittorio followed Giovanni to the fitting room, his mind racing. How did this woman know the sacred words of his family? Had the Duchess or the Calabrese planted her here, or was something else entirely at play? For the first time in years, Don Vittorio Moretti, the feared leader of the most powerful crime family in New York, felt genuinely unnerved. As he mechanically followed the tailor's instructions to turn and extend his arms, his thoughts remained fixated on the enigmatic woman and the impossible knowledge she possessed. Knowledge that, in his world, could get someone killed. As he left the shop 20 minutes later, he glanced back through the window. Isabella Vega stood at the counter, arranging fabric swatches. Sensing his gaze, she looked up and met his eyes directly. No fear, no defiance, just calm assessment. In that moment, Vittorio knew with absolute certainty that their paths would cross again. And when they did, he would have answers one way or another. 3 days after the encounter at Rossi's, Vittorio sat in his office at the Moretti Group headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. From the outside, the Moretti Group appeared to be nothing more than a successful real estate and investment firm. The 43rd floor office, with its panoramic views of the city, served as the legitimate face of an empire built in the shadows. Antonio entered without knocking, the only person afforded such familiarity, and placed a manila folder on the glass desk. Everything we could find on Isabella Vega, he said, his expression grim. It's unusual. Vittorio opened the folder, quickly scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Isabella Maria Vega, 25 years old. Born in Miami to a Cuban mother and a Colombian father. Graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with degrees in linguistics and international relations. Master's degree from Georgetown in global security studies. Fluent in 10 languages as claimed. Former intern at the UN. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. This doesn't explain how she knows our family oath, Vittorio said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. Keep digging. Family connections, social media, everything. Antonio shifted uncomfortably. There's more, boss. She lives in a building owned by Judge Harrington. The same Judge Harrington you had dinner with Tuesday night. Vittorio's eyes narrowed. Coincidences were non-existent in his world. Is she connected to him? Unclear. But there's something else. Antonio hesitated. She made a phone call after you left Rossi's, to this number. He pointed to a line in the report. Vittorio recognized the area code immediately. Chicago, Duca territory. I want surveillance on her 24/7, he ordered, closing the folder. And get me an address for that number. Already done, Antonio replied. It belongs to a Professor Michael Conthi at the University of Chicago Linguistics Department. Vittorio leaned back in his chair. Conthi? Any relation to the Conthi family? He was referring to a minor crime family that had been absorbed by the Duchess a decade earlier. Unknown. We're investigating. A notification chimed on Vittorio's phone. The security system at his penthouse had been triggered. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see Giovanni Rossi's name on the visitor log. The tailor is at my apartment, he said, rising to his feet. With Miss Vega. Antonio's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. It could be a setup. Or an opportunity, Vittorio countered. Call the security team. Have them detained in the lobby until we arrive. 20 minutes later, Vittorio stepped out of the elevator into the private lobby of his Central Park West penthouse. 2 of his security men stood flanking Giovanni and Isabella. The elderly tailor looked terrified. Isabella appeared perfectly composed. Don Moretti, Giovanni stammered. Please forgive this intrusion. You mentioned yesterday that you needed your suit before Saturday, but you left your backup key at the shop. Miss Vega insisted that we deliver it personally. Vittorio's eyes moved to Isabella, who was holding a garment bag draped carefully over her arm. She met his gaze steadily. That was thoughtful, he said carefully. Antonio, please escort Mr. Rossi back to his shop. Miss Vega can bring the suit up." Giovanni began to protest but fell silent under Vittorio's unwavering gaze. Antonio led the old man to the elevator, leaving Isabella alone with Vittorio and one remaining security guard. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Vega," Vittorio said once the elevator doors had closed. "I needed to speak with you privately," she replied, her voice steady. This seemed like the most efficient way. Vittorio gestured to his guard. "Leave us." When the man hesitated, Vittorio added, "Just outside the door." Once they were alone, Vittorio turned to the woman who had occupied his thoughts for days. "You know who I am." It wasn't a question. Isabella nodded, placing the garment bag carefully over a chair. "I know exactly who you are. Don Vittorio Moretti, head of the Moretti crime family, third-generation leader of one of the 5 families of New York. A man who controls half of Manhattan through both legitimate and illegitimate businesses." Vittorio's expression remained impassive, though inwardly he felt a spark of anger at her bluntness. "And you decided to walk into my home with this knowledge? Do you have a death wish, Miss Vega?" "Libero," she replied in flawless Italian. "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. You seem intent on testing my patience with these little demonstrations," he said coldly. "How do you know the sacred oath of my family?" Isabella took a deep breath. "Because my grandfather taught it to me. His name was Angelo Vega. Before that, it was Angelo Visconti." The name hit Vittorio like a physical blow. Visconti. His father's consigliere until 25 years ago, when he disappeared after a suspected betrayal. The family had searched for years, believing that he had defected to a rival organization, a blood debt that had never been settled. "Angelo Visconti is dead," Vittorio said flatly. "If he weren't, he would be a dead man walking." "He died 3 weeks ago," Isabella replied calmly. "Cancer. On his deathbed, he told me everything about his life with the Moretti family, about why he left, about the evidence he kept hidden for 25 years. Vittorio moved with the fluid speed that had surprised enemies throughout his rise to power. In one swift motion, he crossed the room and gripped Isabella's throat, not squeezing, but establishing dominance through proximity and the implied threat. "You come to my home speaking of traitors and evidence," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you join your grandfather right now." To his surprise, she didn't flinch. Her pulse raced beneath his fingers, but her eyes remained steady. "Because the evidence proves that your father was murdered by someone in your organization," she said quietly. "The same person who framed my grandfather for betrayal. The same person who's working with the Ducas to destroy you now." Vittorio's grip loosened slightly, genuine shock breaking through his controlled facade. His father's death had officially been attributed to a heart attack. Sudden but natural. The family patriarch had passed away in his sleep 15 years ago, leaving 20-year-old Vittorio to assume control, guided by his uncle until he came of age. "You're lying," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Your father discovered a traitor within the organization," Isabella continued. "He confided in my grandfather, his most trusted advisor. Before they could act, your father was poisoned, and my grandfather was framed as the traitor. He fled with his family, changed their name, and kept the evidence hidden to protect my mother and me." Vittorio released her and stepped back, his mind racing. "What evidence?" "Records of payments, names, dates, recordings your father made before his death. Everything needed to identify who really betrayed the Moretti family and who's been working against you from the inside ever since." "And where is this evidence now?" Vittorio asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Somewhere safe," Isabella replied. "It's my only insurance. If anything happens to me, it goes to the FBI, the Ducas, and every news organization in New York." Vittorio laughed humorlessly. "You threaten me in my own home? You're either extremely confident or completely insane." "I'm not threatening you, Don Moretti. I'm offering you the truth about your father's murder and the chance to find the real traitor. My grandfather's dying wish was to clear his name and repay his debt to your father. I'm here to fulfill that obligation." For several long moments, Vittorio studied her. Everything he knew told him that this was an elaborate trap. Yet something in her unwavering gaze suggested honesty, or an exceptional ability to lie. "Why should I believe anything you say?" he finally asked. "Il leone non assai volta quando abbia il cane," she replied softly. "The lion doesn't turn around when the dog barks." It was his father's favorite saying, one that he had often used with Vittorio as a boy. It wasn't a common phrase, not something that she could have guessed. Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was Antonio's ringtone. Keeping his eyes fixed on Isabella, he answered, "What? Boss, we have a situation." The Duca underboss was spotted at Enzo's restaurant. 4 of our soldiers confronted him. "It's getting ugly." Enzo's was one of Vittorio's favorite establishments, less than 10 blocks away. This was a deliberate provocation. Duca men on Moretti territory, at a place known to be under the boss's personal protection. "Handle it," Vittorio ordered. "No public scenes. Take him somewhere quiet if necessary." "There's more," Antonio continued. "Judge Harrington was found dead in his apartment an hour ago. Apparent suicide." Vittorio's eyes darted back to Isabella. "I'll call you back," he said, ending the call. "The judge is dead," he told her flatly, watching for her reaction. If she was surprised, she concealed it well. "That's why I came today. I received a warning from one of my grandfather's old contacts. The judge's death was ordered by the same person who killed your father. My name is next on the list." "Why would they target you now, after all these years?" "Because I accessed my grandfather's safety deposit box last week," she explained. "Someone has been watching. They know that I have the evidence." Vittorio paced the room, his mind working furiously. If she was telling the truth, then there was a traitor close to him. Someone who had been in his organization for decades. Someone who had murdered his father and was now working with the Ducas. If she was lying, this could be an elaborate setup to get close to him during a vulnerable time. Either way, he needed to keep her close. "You'll stay here," he decided abruptly. Isabella blinked. "Excuse me? If someone is trying to kill you for this evidence, you're safer under my protection. If you're lying to me..." He let the implication hang in the air. "I'm not going to be your prisoner," she protested. "You lost the right to negotiate when you walked into my home with accusations about my father's death," Vittorio replied coldly. "You'll stay here, where my men can watch you, until I determine whether you're telling the truth." He pressed a button on his phone. "Antonio, we have a guest who will be staying in the South Suite. Arrange appropriate security." Isabella crossed her arms. "And if I refuse?" Vittorio stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me be clear, Miss Vega. You've presented yourself as either an invaluable ally or a dangerous enemy. Until I know which, you don't leave my sight. Consider it protection, or captivity. The choice of perspective is yours, but the reality remains the same." For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her face, quickly replaced by determination. "I'll need my things from my apartment. Write a list. My people will collect them." Antonio entered, his eyebrows raising slightly at the palpable tension in the room. "Show Miss Vega to the South Suite, Antonio," Vittorio ordered. "She'll be staying with us indefinitely." As Antonio led her away, Isabella paused at the door. "Your father once told my grandfather that his greatest fear wasn't death, but that his son would inherit his position without knowing who he could truly trust." Her eyes held Vittorio's. He was right to be afraid. After she had gone, Vittorio poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out before him, a kingdom he controlled through fear and loyalty, power and money. Somewhere in that concrete labyrinth lay either the truth about his father's death or an elaborate trap closing in around him. For the first time in years, Don Vittorio Moretti felt the cold touch of uncertainty. The woman down the hall had shattered his carefully constructed world with a few sentences in perfect Italian, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed with Isabella effectively under house arrest in Vittorio's penthouse. The South Suite, A luxurious guest apartment with its own sitting room, bedroom, and bathroom became her gilded cage. Armed guards monitored the elevator and exits. Her phone and laptop had been confiscated, although she had been allowed to keep her books and clothing. For his part, Vittorio kept his distance, tasking Antonio with investigating her claims while he dealt with the escalating situation with the Duchess. The confrontation at Enzo's restaurant had been contained, but tensions throughout the city were reaching a breaking point. Reports from Vittorio's captains suggested that the Duchess were consolidating their power, preparing for something big. On the fourth morning, Vittorio entered the suite without knocking. Isabella was sitting by the window, a book open in her lap. She was wearing simple black pants and a cream-colored silk blouse, items his men had collected from her apartment. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, softer than the severe style she had worn at Rossi's. "Have you verified my story yet?" she asked without preamble. "Partially," he replied, taking a seat across from her. "Angelo Visconti did change his name to Vega. He did move to Miami with a young daughter, your mother. He did work as my father's consigliere until his disappearance 25 years ago. And nothing you've told me proves that he didn't betray my father," Vittorio said flatly. "It doesn't explain how your grandfather knew my father was murdered when his death was ruled as due to natural causes." Isabella closed her book carefully. "Because my grandfather helped to cover it up. Your uncle, Salvatore Moretti, convinced him that it was necessary to prevent a war. He said that if word got out that Don Moretti had been assassinated, the other families would have seen it as a sign of weakness and moved against you all." Vittorio's eyes narrowed. His uncle Salvatore had served as acting boss until Vittorio turned 25, then stepped back to become consigliere. He had been like a father to Vittorio after his real father's death. "You expect me to believe that my uncle covered up my father's murder? The same uncle who taught me everything, who protected our family's interests until I was ready to lead." "I expect you to consider the possibility," Isabella replied evenly. "Who benefited the most from your father's death and my grandfather's disappearance? Who took control of the Moretti family afterward?" "Careful," Vittorio warned, his voice deadly quiet. "You're accusing the man who raised me." Isabella leaned forward. "I'm telling you what my grandfather told me. Check the records. After your father died and my grandfather disappeared, your uncle consolidated power. Captains who were loyal to your father were reassigned or found dead. Family traditions changed. Territory was conceded to other families, particularly the Duchess. The accusations struck uncomfortably close to memories that Vittorio had long suppressed. There had been changes after his father's death, shifts in allegiances, subtle alterations to how business was conducted. The investigation had been underway for quite some time. At the tender age of 20, consumed by grief and desperately trying to prove his worth, he hadn't dared to question his uncle's guidance. "If my uncle craved control so much," Vittorio challenged, his voice laced with suspicion, "why would he relinquish it to me when I came of age? He could have eliminated me at any moment." "Because the Moretti name carries weight," Isabella responded, her tone unwavering. "The family adheres to the bloodline. Your soldiers are loyal to you because you are your father's son. Your uncle needs you as the figurehead while he dictates the real decisions behind the scenes." Vittorio rose abruptly, pacing the room with agitated energy. "This is utterly absurd," he declared, his skepticism evident. "You bring me nothing but accusations and convenient stories spun by a deceased traitor. Then allow me to present the evidence to you directly." Isabella countered calmly, her gaze fixed on him. "Take me to the location where my grandfather safeguarded it, so you can lead me into a meticulously planned ambush?" Vittorio questioned, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I hardly think so." Isabella stood up to face him, her posture unwavering despite the significant height difference. "If I desired your demise," she asserted, her voice clear and resolute, "I wouldn't have approached you with this information. I would have taken it directly to your enemies or the authorities. Perhaps your scheme is more intricate than that," Vittorio suggested, his expression thoughtful. "Gain my trust, get close to me, and then strike when I'm most vulnerable. And how precisely would I accomplish such a feat? She challenged, her brow furrowed in disbelief. I am a linguistics expert, not an assassin. You have men constantly monitoring my every move. You've confiscated my phone, isolating me from everyone I know. What possible threat could I pose to the great Don Moretti? There was a spark of defiance in her eyes that stirred something within Victorio, something that transcended suspicion and anger. Few people dared to speak to him in such a manner. The fact that she did, fully aware of his identity and power, was either an act of incredible bravery or utter foolishness. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion erupted from the hallway outside. Antonio burst through the door, his expression etched with urgency. "Boss, we have a situation," he announced breathlessly. "Someone hit Franco's club downtown. 6 of our men are down." Victorio's expression hardened instantly, his features becoming cold and resolute. "The DeLucas?" he questioned, his voice low and dangerous. "Unknown, professional hit," Antonio replied, shaking his head. They knew the precise timing of the delivery. It was an inside job. The implication hung heavy in the air. Only those within Victorio's inner circle were privy to the schedule for deliveries to Franco's club. Deliveries that were ostensibly high-end liquor but, in reality, contained items of far greater value. "Lock down all operations immediately," Victorio ordered, his voice sharp and decisive. "Call an emergency meeting of all the capos at the warehouse. 1 hour. Antonio nodded, his movements swift and efficient, then hesitated, glancing in Isabella's direction. "What about her?" he asked, concern evident in his tone. Victorio considered the matter for a moment, weighing his options. "She comes with us," he declared, his decision firm. "I'm not leaving her unattended, and I need all available security personnel." "That's not advisable, boss," Antonio began, his voice laced with caution. Victorio cut him off with a sharp gesture. Turning to Isabella, he added, "One wrong move, one word I don't like, and you'll wish you never even heard the name Moretti. Understood?" She nodded, a flicker of something akin to relief crossing her features. After days of confinement within the suite, even a perilous outing was preferable to the stifling isolation. 30 minutes later, they were ensconced within Victorio's armored Bentley, forming part of a 3-car convoy heading towards Brooklyn. Isabella sat beside Victorio in the back seat, while Antonio drove with another guard in the passenger seat. "This is precisely what my grandfather warned me about," Isabella said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine, ensuring that only Victorio could hear. "The information leaks, the coordinated attacks, it's been happening for years, but it's been escalating recently." Victorio cast her a sideways glance, his expression unreadable. "And why do you suppose that is?" he inquired, his tone laced with skepticism. "Because your uncle is finally ready to make his move," she replied, her voice steady and resolute. "He's been collaborating with the DeLucas to undermine your position from within. Today's attack is merely the beginning." Before Victorio could respond, his phone rang, the caller ID displaying Marco, his current consigliere. "Marco," he answered, his voice guarded. "Are you at the warehouse?" "Don Moretti." Marco's voice was tense and strained. "Do not come to the warehouse. It's a setup. I just got word." The line went dead as the first impact struck. A black SUV slammed into the lead car of their convoy, sending it spinning uncontrollably across the road. Another vehicle rammed them from behind, the armored Bentley absorbing the impact but still lurching forward violently. "Ambush!" Antonio shouted, his voice ringing with alarm as he drew his weapon and accelerated in an attempt to break free from the attacking vehicles. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging harmlessly off the bulletproof glass. Victorio pushed Isabella down below window level, his own weapon already in hand. "Call for backup," he ordered Antonio, who was maneuvering the heavy vehicle with remarkable skill, striving to evade their attackers. The third car in their convoy returned fire, creating enough of a distraction for Antonio to swerve down a side street. The pursuing vehicles followed, one pulling alongside as the gunmen aimed at their tires, the vulnerable point of even armored vehicles. "Hold on," Antonio warned before executing a sharp turn that sent their attacker crashing into a parked delivery truck. Isabella clung to the door handle, her eyes wide with fear but remarkably composed given the circumstances. The remaining pursuing vehicle was gaining ground when Antonio made another turn, this time into a narrow alley barely wide enough for the Bentley. "Where are you going?" Victorio demanded, his voice laced with urgency. "Safe house on Kent Avenue," Antonio replied, expertly navigating the tight space. "It's our best option." They emerged from the alley onto a quieter street, the pursuing vehicle momentarily lost. Antonio maintained speed, weaving through the Brooklyn streets towards the waterfront district, where the Moretti family maintained several properties, including a secure safe house used only in emergencies. "Who knew about the meeting?" Victorio asked, his voice deadly calm despite the ongoing attack. "Only the capos and your uncle," Antonio replied, constantly checking the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. "And now we know who's behind it," Isabella said quietly, her gaze fixed on Victorio. Victorio's expression revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his phone, attempting to call his uncle. There was no answer. 10 minutes later, they pulled into an underground garage beneath a nondescript industrial building. 2 guards emerged immediately, weapons drawn until they recognized the vehicle. "Secure the perimeter," Antonio ordered as they exited the car. "No one enters or leaves without direct authorization from Don Moretti. And find out what happened to our third vehicle." The safe house occupied the top floor of the converted warehouse, a luxurious apartment with reinforced walls, state-of-the-art security systems, and multiple escape routes. As they entered, Victorio immediately moved to the communication center, attempting to contact his captains, while Antonio coordinated with security. Isabella stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly feeling like an outsider amidst this efficient machine of criminal crisis management. After a moment, Victorio glanced up at her. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to a leather sofa. "This doesn't mean I believe you." She complied, watching as he made call after call, his expression growing darker with each conversation. After 20 minutes, he approached her, sitting heavily in the chair opposite. "Franco is dead," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Marco is missing. 3 of my capos didn't show up at the warehouse, and the ones who did walked into an ambush. 6 more men are dead." "I'm sorry," Isabella said quietly, and seemed to genuinely mean it. "My uncle is unreachable," Victorio continued, studying her reaction intently. "Convenient timing for your accusations. Or confirmation of them," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "This wasn't just an attack. It was a coordinated purge. Only someone with intimate knowledge of your organization could have orchestrated it." Victorio leaned back, fatigue briefly showing through his controlled exterior. "You keep talking about evidence. If your grandfather possessed proof of my uncle's betrayal, why didn't he use it 25 years ago?" Isabella's expression softened. "Because he was thinking of you. You were just a boy. He didn't want you to lose both your father and your uncle in one devastating blow. And later, when you were older, he feared you wouldn't believe him or that you'd be too loyal to the man who raised you. And now he's dead. And his dying wish was for me to deliver the truth and clear his name. The evidence exists, Don Moretti," she continued, her voice filled with conviction. "Financial records documenting your uncle receiving payments from the DeLucas for years. Recordings of your father discussing the betrayal he uncovered before his death. Documentation detailing how your uncle systematically eliminated everyone loyal to your father." Victorio was silent for a long moment, weighing his options, assessing the risks. Trust was a luxury in his world, and Isabella Vega was still an unknown variable. Yet, the day's events lent credibility to her claims. Someone close to him had orchestrated the attacks, someone with intimate knowledge of his operations. "Where is this evidence?" he finally asked, his voice low and dangerous. "In a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Manhattan," she replied, her gaze unwavering. Under the name Maria Key, the Chicago professor you called. Isabella didn't seem surprised that he knew about the call. My mother's cousin. He's a linguistics expert, the only family connection I maintained that my grandfather approved of. I called him to let him know I was following through on my grandfather's wishes. Victorio studied her carefully, his gaze intense. Tomorrow morning we'll visit this bank. If you're lying to me, I'm not, she said simply, her voice filled with conviction. Antonio appeared at Victorio's side, his expression grave. Boss, we have confirmation that your uncle is alive. He's called an emergency meeting of the commission, all 5 families. He's claiming you've been compromised. The commission, the governing body of the major crime families, convened only during times of serious conflict or succession issues. For Victorio's uncle to call such a meeting was effectively a declaration of war against his own nephew. When and where? Victorio demanded, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Tomorrow night, the old location on Staten Island. Victorio's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. He's making his move, consolidating support from the other families before he comes for me directly. If you go to that meeting, you won't leave alive, Isabella said softly, her voice laced with urgency. This is exactly how my grandfather described your father's last days, isolated, with his support stripped away, before the final betrayal. For a fleeting moment, vulnerability flashed across Victorio's features. A glimpse of the boy who had lost his father, who had trusted his uncle, who had shouldered the weight of the Moretti legacy far too young. Then, his expression hardened once more into the impassive mask of the dawn. Get some rest, he told Isabella, standing abruptly. Tomorrow we retrieve your evidence, and then I'll decide whether your grandfather's debt to my father has been repaid, or if the Vega family will join the Visconti name in extinction. He turned to walk away, but Isabella caught his arm. A gesture so unexpected and intimate that Victorio's bodyguards tensed, their hands instinctively moving towards their weapons. With a slight gesture, Victorio waved them off. What? He asked, looking down at where her fingers gripped the fine material of his suit. You asked why you should believe me, she said, her voice low and intense. Because I could have taken this evidence to the FBI for witness protection. I could have sold it to the DeLucas or the Calibrii for a fortune. Instead, I came to you knowing exactly how dangerous you are, because my grandfather believed that the son of Antonio Moretti deserved to know the truth. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Victorio was accustomed to seeing fear in people's eyes when they looked at him, fear thinly disguised as respect or deference. In Isabella's eyes, he saw neither. Instead, there was determination, intelligence, and something else he couldn't quite name. We'll see what truth the morning brings, he said finally, gently removing her hand from his arm. As he walked away, Victorio felt a strange certainty forming in his mind. Tomorrow would change everything. Either Isabella Vega would prove to be his salvation, revealing a betrayal decades in the making, or she would be eliminated as an enemy of the Moretti family. There would be no middle ground, no space for uncertainty in the dangerous world he commanded. What troubled him most as he stared out at the Brooklyn skyline from the safe house window was the realization that, for the first time in years, the prospect of someone's death brought him no satisfaction, only a hollow ache he couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. Dawn broke over New York City as Victorio stood at the safe house window, watching the early light transform the Brooklyn waterfront. He hadn't slept. The events of the previous day, the ambush, the deaths of his men, his uncle's betrayal, had left him in a state of cold calculation, mentally reconstructing his power structure, identifying weaknesses and planning counter-moves. Behind him, Isabella emerged from the guest bedroom, dressed in the same clothes as yesterday, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked surprisingly composed for someone caught in the crosshairs of a mafia war. You should have run, Victorio said without turning, his voice devoid of emotion. When the ambush happened, you could have escaped in the chaos. To where? She asked simply, her voice laced with a hint of fatalism. If your uncle wins this war, I'm as good as dead. He knows I have the evidence. Antonio entered with 2 other guards, all armed and vigilant. "Boss, we've secured a route to Manhattan. The bank opens at 9. Victorio nodded, finally turning from the window. "Any word from Marco?" "Still missing, but we found 3 of our capos. They're loyal to you, waiting for instructions. Have them secure our most important properties, the club, the restaurant in Little Italy, the warehouse in Queens. I want trusted men only, no one connected to my uncle." As Antonio left to make arrangements, Victorio approached Isabella. "If this is an elaborate trap, today is when it springs. Do you understand what that means for you?" She met his gaze steadily, her eyes unwavering. "I understand perfectly, but it's not a trap." Something in her unwavering confidence gave him pause, a moment of hesitation in his world of shifting loyalties and calculated betrayals. Her conviction seemed almost out of place, a fixed point amidst chaos. 90 minutes later, they pulled up 2 blocks from First National Bank, having switched vehicles twice to ensure they weren't being followed. Victorio wore a tailored gray suit that concealed his weapon, while Isabella had been given a simple black dress from the safe house supplies. "2 of my men will accompany us," Victorio instructed as they prepared to enter the bank. "When we reach the vault, you'll open the box with me present." Isabella nodded, showing no hesitation. As they entered the bank's ornate lobby, Victorio scanned for threats, a lifetime habit that had kept him alive through numerous attempts on his life. Nothing seemed amiss as they approached the customer service desk. "I need access to my safe deposit box," Isabella told the representative, her voice calm and collected. "Maria Key." The woman checked her computer. "Of course, Miss Key. May I see your ID and key?" Isabella produced both from her purse, items Antonio had retrieved from her apartment days earlier. After verification, they were escorted to the vault area, Victorio and 1 guard accompanying her, while the second man remained in the lobby. The bank employee opened the outer lock, then stepped aside. "Just press the button when you're finished." Once alone in the viewing room, Isabella inserted her key into the box and pulled out a weathered leather portfolio, her hands trembling slightly, the first sign of nervousness Victorio had seen from her. "Open it," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Inside were neatly organized documents, USB drives, and what appeared to be old micro-cassette tapes. Isabella handed him a manila envelope from the top of the stack. "These are the financial records, the first transfers from Duca accounts to offshore entities controlled by your uncle, dating back 25 years. Victorio examined the papers, his expression darkening as he recognized account numbers and transaction codes. These were authentic Moretti family financial records, documents only someone with insider access could have obtained. "This proves nothing except that my grandfather was a thief when he disappeared," Victorio said, though his voice lacked conviction. Without arguing, Isabella handed him a small digital recorder. "This is more compelling. My grandfather transferred the original recordings your father made to digital format before he died." Victorio took the device, pressing play with reluctance. After a moment of static, a voice emerged, a voice he hadn't heard in 15 years but recognized instantly. His father. September 12, 1998. "I've confirmed Salvatore's betrayal. The Duca money, the sabotage shipments, the information leaks. It all traces back to my own brother. Marco suspects nothing. The only man I can trust now is Angelo. Tomorrow we move against Salvatore, but if anything happens to me, Angelo has instructions. Victorio must be protected until he's ready to take his rightful place." Victorio's hand tightened around the recorder, his knuckles white. The date was 3 days before his father's heart attack. He started to speak but stopped as the recording continued. "Angelo, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. Protect my son. Salvatore will try to control him, to shape him into a puppet he can manipulate. The evidence is in the Manhattan apartment behind the painting in my study. Don't confront Salvatore directly. He has too many loyal men. Wait until Victorio is older, strong enough to reclaim what's his, our family, our legacy. Tivolio ben Felio." The last words, "I love you, my son," hit Victorio like a physical blow. He turned away, gripping the edge of the table as years of carefully constructed certainty crumbled around him. "There's more," Isabella said quietly, giving him a moment to compose himself. "Documents detailing how your uncle realigned the family structure after your father's death. Correspondence with the Ducas dating back decades. Everything my grandfather saved to fulfill his promise to your father." Victorio straightened, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Why didn't your grandfather come to me when I took control at 25? Why wait all these years?" "Fear," Isabella answered simply. "Fear that you wouldn't believe him against the uncle who raised you. Fear that Salvatore's men would kill him and his family before he could convince you, and later illness. Cancer took years to claim him, but it made him cautious, patient. He wanted to be certain the evidence would reach you intact. Through you," Victorio observed, studying her with new intensity. "He sent his granddaughter into a war zone." A sad smile touched Isabella's lips. "I volunteered. My grandfather taught me everything about your world from the time I was old enough to understand the languages, the codes, the history of the families. When he knew he was dying, I promised to complete his mission. At the risk of your own life. Family obligations transcend personal safety," she replied with a simple dignity that resonated with Victorio's own deeply held beliefs. "You of all people should understand that." Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. A text from Antonio in the lobby. "Uncle's men outside, at least 6, need to move now." Victorio's mind shifted instantly to tactical planning. "We have company. My uncle's found us." Isabella quickly repacked the portfolio. "There's a service entrance through the vault area. My grandfather made me memorize the bank's layout." "Of course he did," Victorio said with grim appreciation. To his guard, he ordered, "Tell Antonio to create a diversion. We're going out the back." As they moved through the vault area towards a staff door, the sound of commotion reached them from the lobby. Gunshots would bring police, something even warring Mafia factions tried to avoid. But Victorio knew his uncle's men would have other means of stopping them. They emerged into a narrow hallway lined with offices. A startled bank employee looked up from her desk as they passed, too surprised to raise an alarm. At the end of the corridor, a service door led to a back alley where deliveries were received. "My car is 2 blocks north," Victorio said as they exited into the alley. "Stay close." They moved quickly but calmly, avoiding attention as they navigated the morning crowds of Lower Manhattan. Isabella clutched the portfolio containing 25 years of evidence against her chest, while Victorio scanned constantly for threats. They were halfway to the car when Victorio spotted 2 men approaching from the next intersection, the unmistakable look of soldiers on a mission, hands concealed in jacket pockets where weapons waited. "Cross the street," he murmured to Isabella, guiding her with a hand at the small of her back. "Don't run, don't look at them." As they stepped onto the opposite sidewalk, one of the men spoke into his wrist, communicating their position to others. The net was closing. "They've seen us," Victorio said calmly. "When I say run, head into that department store ahead. Find the loading dock and exit on the far side." Isabella nodded, her breathing controlled despite the danger. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. The evidence is what matters now." The men were moving more purposefully now, angling to intercept them. One reached into his jacket. "Run," Victorio commanded. Isabella sprinted toward the store entrance, clutching the portfolio. Victorio drew his weapon, keeping it low against his leg as he backed towards the store, creating a barrier between Isabella and their pursuers. One of the men raised his gun, a rookie mistake in broad daylight on a Manhattan street. Before he could fire, Victorio put 2 bullets in his chest. The second man dove for cover as pedestrians screamed and scattered. Inside the department store, chaos erupted as shoppers reacted to the gunshots outside. Victorio found Isabella waiting just inside the entrance, her face pale but composed. "This way," she said, navigating confidently through the store towards the back. Years of linguistic training had given her an almost photographic memory for layouts and spatial relationships, a skill now proving unexpectedly valuable. They reached the loading dock just as alarms began to sound throughout the building. Employees looked up in confusion as Victorio and Isabella pushed through the double doors onto a busy service road behind the building. "My safe house in Tribeca is 10 minutes from here," Victorio said, pulling out his phone to call for extraction. Before he could dial, the device buzzed with an incoming call, a number he recognized as belonging to his consigliera. "Marco, where are you?" Victorio demanded upon answering. "Don Moretti." Marco's voice was strained. "Don't trust anyone. Your uncle has called in favors from all 5 families. They're hunting you across the city." "Marco, I need extraction. Lower Manhattan near." "No time," Marco interrupted. "Listen carefully. Your uncle has taken your sister Maria. He's holding her at the old distillery in Red Hook. He's using her as bait to draw you out." Victorio felt ice form in his veins. Maria, his younger sister, the only family member he truly trusted, scheduled to be married in 3 weeks. She lived in Boston, deliberately distant from family business, protected by Victorio's best men. If he's hurt her, she's alive for now, but he's desperate. The commission meeting is tonight. He needs you eliminated before then to secure their support. "How did you escape the ambush?" A pained laugh came through the line. "I didn't entirely. I'm at Queen's Hospital. Your uncle's men don't know yet, but they will soon. You need to move." Victorio's mind raced, calculating options, risks, and potential betrayals. "If this is a trap, Marco, after 20 years of loyalty, you still doubt me?" The hurt in his consigliera's voice was genuine. "Your father saved my life. That debt passes to his son." After ending the call, Victorio turned to Isabella, who had heard enough to understand the situation. "They have your sister," she said softly. "It's another manipulation." "Manipulation or not, I can't ignore it," Victorio replied, already formulating a plan. "If they hurt Maria, nothing else matters, not the evidence. Not my uncle's betrayal, nothing." "It's a trap, Victorio," Isabella insisted, her voice rising with alarm. "Exactly what my grandfather warned about. Your uncle knows your weakness." "Maria is not a weakness," Victorio snapped, a rare flash of emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. "She's my sister, my family. Nothing is more important." Isabella studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we go together. The distillery would need heavy security. You're going to need help. You've done plenty just bringing me the evidence. This isn't your battle." "It became my battle the minute my grandfather sent me to you," she shot back, her tone unwavering. "Besides, you need someone your uncle doesn't know. Someone who can move around without being noticed while all his goons are busy hunting you." Vittorio thought it over, weighing the risks against any possible advantages. "All right," he finally conceded with a nod. "We're going to need weapons, a way to get there, and a solid plan. I've got a hidden stash of cash just a couple of blocks from here." As they made their way through the back streets toward Vittorio's emergency supplies, he couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He wasn't used to trusting anyone outside his own organization, especially someone he'd only known for less than a week. Still, Isabella Vega had proven herself time and time again, risking her own life to keep a promise her grandfather had made. In Vittorio's line of work, that kind of loyalty was worth more than all the diamonds in the world. It was rarer than any precious stone. The hidden cash, stashed in a storage room above a restaurant owned by some distant Moretti relative, had everything they needed: guns, money, burner phones, and disguises. As Isabella changed into a pair of jeans and a hoodie, clothes that would help her blend in with the Brooklyn neighborhood surrounding the distillery, Vittorio made a call to the 3 capos he knew were still loyal to him. "I need men at the old distillery in Red Hook," he told them. "I just need discreet surveillance only. My uncle has Maria and I'm going in to get her." While they were getting ready, Isabella was busy studying a blueprint of the distillery that Vittorio had pulled up on his laptop. "Your uncle is going to expect you to come through the main entrance or the loading dock," she pointed out. "Both of those are going to be heavily guarded, limited approaches. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to the river," Vittorio explained, pointing to a section of the blueprint. It's a bootlegger route from back in the Prohibition days. My father showed it to me when I was just a kid. Isabella's face clouded over. Your uncle know about it? Possibly. My father might have shown him too. But it's still our best bet, Isabella concluded. If we can sneak inside without being detected, we might be able to find your sister before we have to face your uncle. As they put the finishing touches on their plan, Vittorio couldn't help but look at Isabella with a newfound respect. Her sharp mind, her language skills, and her surprising bravery were all things he hadn't expected. In the middle of the biggest crisis of his leadership, he had found an unlikely ally. Why are you really doing this? He asked her suddenly. Your grandfather's debt to my father has been paid. You handed over the evidence. You could just walk away right now. Isabella looked him straight in the eye. Maybe I think your father was right to trust mine. Maybe I think the son of Antonio Moretti deserves a chance to take back what's rightfully his. She paused for a moment, then went on. Or maybe I've spent my whole life hearing stories about the Moretti family, and I just want to see how this one ends. There was something in her eyes that Vittorio couldn't quite put his finger on. It was definitely determination, but there was also a hint of something else, something more personal, more complex. Before he could ask her anything else, his phone buzzed with a text message from one of his capos who was outside the distillery. 6 guards visible, 2 at the main entrance, 2 at the loading dock, 2 patrolling the perimeter. Unknown number of men inside. Black SUV with Maria arrived about 20 minutes ago. Vittorio's face darkened. It's confirmed. They've got my sister. We move in 1 hour when it gets dark enough to give us some cover. As they got ready to go, Vittorio felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unlike any he had ever faced before in his life. By the time the night was over, either he would have taken back his family's legacy and saved his sister, or the Moretti empire that his grandfather had built would fall into the hands of a traitor. And Isabella Vega, the woman who had walked into his world with dangerous knowledge and unwavering courage, would share whatever fate awaited him. For the first time in years, Don Vittorio Moretti felt the full weight of his family name and the responsibility that came with it. This night wasn't just about his future, it was about the future of everyone who was connected to him, by blood, by loyalty, or by the strange twist of fate that had brought Isabella into his life at the exact moment when he needed her the most. Darkness had fallen over the Brooklyn waterfront as Vittorio and Isabella made their way toward the old distillery from the river. The abandoned industrial building loomed in the night sky, its brick walls lit up only by the security lights that were placed at key entry points. From where they were near the water, they could see Salvatore's men on patrol, professional, alert, and heavily armed. My guys counted about 12 guards outside, Vittorio said quietly, looking at the building through his binoculars. There's probably at least that many inside, maybe more. Isabella nodded, pulling her dark hoodie tighter around her to keep out the cold coming off the water. And the tunnel entrance is right there. Vittorio pointed to a maintenance shed near the water's edge. It looks like it's unguarded, but they might have sensors or cameras that we can't see. They waited in silence as a patrol walked by, then quickly moved to the shed. The padlock on the door looked like it hadn't been touched, which was encouraging, but Vittorio was still careful as he picked the lock with practiced ease. Inside, under layers of junk and forgotten equipment, a trapdoor led to a narrow brick tunnel, a relic from the days when bootleggers used to move illegal liquor straight from ships to the distillery without the feds knowing. Your father showed you this? Isabella whispered as they went down into the damp tunnel. Vittorio nodded, a rare hint of tenderness on his face. He said a good leader always has an escape route ready. He brought me here when I was 10 and made me memorize every turn. The tunnel was about 100 yards long, barely wide enough for them to walk single file. Their only light came from the narrow beam of a tactical flashlight. Water dripped from the ceiling, and their footsteps echoed even though they were trying to be quiet. If your uncle knows about this tunnel, we're walking right into an ambush, Isabella warned. Then we die together, Vittorio said matter-of-factly. But I think he's forgotten about it. Salvatore always liked making a grand entrance, and it was always a demonstration of power. Subtlety was never his strong suit. At the end of the tunnel, a steep metal ladder led up to another trapdoor. Vittorio paused, listening closely, before slowly pushing it open. They came out into what used to be a storage cellar, which was now filled with dusty barrels and abandoned equipment. "We're in," he whispered, helping Isabella through the trapdoor. "The main distillery floor is one level up. Maria will most likely be kept somewhere where she is visible. My uncle will want me to see her right away when I come through the main doors. How do we find her without getting caught? There's a catwalk above the main floor. We can use it to get a lay of the land before we make a move." They moved silently through the cellar to a service stairwell, with Vittorio leading the way with his gun drawn. Years of being in dangerous situations had sharpened his senses. Every creak of the building, every change in the air, registered as either a possible threat or something that might be useful. To get to the catwalk, they had to go through a maze of abandoned offices and storage rooms. Twice they had to freeze in place as guards walked by, their voices echoing through the huge building. Finally, they reached a metal door that Vittorio knew would lead to the overhead walkway. "Wait," Isabella whispered, putting her hand on his arm. "What's our plan once we find your sister? We'll create a diversion on the other side of the building. My men are in position to help us as soon as we give them the signal. While everyone's distracted, we'll get to Maria and get out through this same tunnel." Isabella nodded, but she still looked worried. "What about your uncle?" Vittorio's eyes hardened. "Tonight, we settle family obligations permanently." The catwalk gave them a perfect view of the main distillery floor. From their hidden spot, they could see Salvatore Moretti pacing back and forth near the central copper still that dominated the room. He had at least 15 armed men around him, a clear show of force. And there, tied to a chair in the middle of the room, was Maria Moretti. Even from that distance, Vittorio could see the fear in his sister's eyes, but she was holding her head high. A Moretti through and through, refusing to show any weakness, even when she was a prisoner. "Is she hurt?" Isabella asked, noticing how tense Vittorio was. "Not that I can see," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "But Salvatore is going to pay for every second she's been scared." As they watched, Salvatore checked his watch and walked over to Maria, talking to her and gesturing wildly. Even though they couldn't hear what he was saying, it was clear from the way Maria recoiled that he was threatening her. "He's getting impatient," Isabella observed. "The commission meeting is in 3 hours. He needs to get this taken care of before then." Vittorio's phone vibrated silently. It was a text from his capos outside. "In position, awaiting signal. We move in 5 minutes, he decided, sending back a short reply with instructions. "My men are going to create a diversion at the main entrance. When Salvatore's guards respond, we drop to the floor, get to Maria, and head back to the tunnel." Isabella nodded, her composure impressive for someone who wasn't used to being in combat situations. As Vittorio got ready to move, she grabbed his arm again. "Vittorio," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "Whatever happens, your father would be proud of the man you've become. My grandfather always said Antonio Moretti's greatest achievement wasn't his empire, but his son." Something passed between them that didn't need to be said, a connection that went beyond the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. For a brief moment, Vittorio allowed himself to recognize the strange trust that had developed between them, the unexpected partnership that had given him a chance to reclaim his family's honor. That moment was shattered by the sound of gunfire erupting from the main entrance. The diversion had begun. Just like they had expected, most of Salvatore's men ran toward the sound, weapons drawn, leaving only 4 guards with Maria and Salvatore. "Now," Vittorio ordered, quickly moving to the catwalk ladder. They climbed down quickly, using the massive distillery equipment as cover as they made their way toward the center of the room where Maria was being held. Salvatore was yelling orders, clearly annoyed by the unexpected attack. In all the chaos, he hadn't noticed the 2 figures who were steadily getting closer to him. They were about 20 feet away when one of the remaining guards spotted them and raised his weapon, shouting a warning. Vittorio fired first, dropping the man with a single shot. The noise alerted Salvatore, who spun around to see his nephew, his face twisting with shock and anger. "Vittorio," he snarled, immediately using Maria as a shield and pressing a gun to her head. "I should have known you'd find a way in. Always the clever one, just like your father." Vittorio walked forward slowly, his gun pointed at his uncle. Isabella stayed slightly behind him, trying to flank him from the right. "It's over, Salvatore," Vittorio said, his voice calm and deadly. "I know everything. The betrayal, my father's murder, the deal with the Ducas, 25 years of lies." Salvatore laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "What do you think you know? Whatever stories this woman has been telling you," he said, gesturing dismissively toward Isabella. "They're nothing but the desperate lies of a traitor's granddaughter." "I heard my father's recording," Vittorio replied. "His own words naming you as the one who betrayed him 3 days before you had him killed." Something flickered in Salvatore's eyes, genuine surprise, but it was quickly gone. "Impossible. Angelo never had." "Angelo Visconti had everything," Isabella interrupted. "Every record, every transaction, every communication with the Ducas. My grandfather kept it all safe for this moment." Maria's eyes widened as she heard these revelations, her gaze going back and forth between her brother and her uncle, her horror growing with each passing second. Despite the gun that was pressed against her head, she straightened her back, Moretti pride overcoming her fear. "Even if what you're saying is true," Salvatore said, trying to regain his composure, "it doesn't change anything. The commission has already turned against you, Vittorio. The other families aren't going to let Antonio's self-righteous son disrupt the profitable arrangements that we've had in place for decades. The commission respects strength and legacy above all else," Vittorio countered, moving closer. "When they find out how you betrayed your own blood, how you murdered your brother to take power, they'll understand why the Moretti name has to be cleansed of your dishonor." Salvatore's face darkened with real anger. "You think you understand our world? Boy, your father was weak. His outdated codes of honor, his refusal to move with the times. He was leading us to ruin. Everything I've done has been to protect the Moretti Empire. By selling pieces of it to our enemies?" Vittorio asked, his disgust obvious. "By betraying the very principles that made our family strong?" Their standoff was broken by an explosion from the front of the building. The fight with Vittorio's men was getting worse. Salvatore glanced nervously toward the sound, his grip on Maria loosening for a moment. It was all the opening Vittorio needed. "Now!" he shouted to Isabella, who instantly threw the metal canister she had been hiding. The flashbang grenade went off with a blinding flash of light and a deafening bang. In the few seconds of confusion, Vittorio launched himself toward his sister, knocking her chair over sideways, getting her out of Salvatore's reach as his uncle stumbled backward. Salvatore recovered quickly and started firing wildly as Vittorio shielded Maria with his body. One bullet grazed Vittorio's shoulder, and another shattered the wooden chair that had been holding Maria. Isabella, moving with surprising skill, engaged one of the remaining guards, using a combination of surprise and training to disarm him before Vittorio could get into a position to take a clear shot. "Get Maria to the tunnel," Vittorio ordered Isabella, turning to face his uncle as more of Salvatore's men came rushing back from the front entrance, drawn by the sound of the gunfire. Isabella hesitated for only a moment before cutting Maria's bonds with a pocket knife and pulling her toward their escape route. Maria didn't want to go. She didn't want to leave her brother behind. "Vittorio, no!" she cried, knowing that he intended to face Salvatore alone. "Go!" he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll be right behind you." As Isabella pulled Maria toward the service stairwell, Vittorio and Salvatore circled each other. Generations of Moretti power and betrayal were now focused on this confrontation. The arriving guards held their fire, instinctively knowing that this was a personal matter. "You've lost everything, Salvatore," Vittorio said, his voice carrying through the huge room. "The commission will hear the truth tonight. The evidence has already been sent to trusted captains in all 5 families. Even if you kill me, everyone will know what you did." Salvatore's calm finally broke, and desperation replaced calculation in his eyes. "You stupid boy. Do you think this ends with me? The Dukas have infiltrated every level of your organization. Loyal men have already been killed. Your precious empire is burning while you're chasing ghosts from the past." As if to emphasize his words, another explosion shook the building, closer this time. Flames were now visible coming from the direction of the main entrance. The distillery, with decades of dust and alcohol soaked into the wood, would be an inferno in minutes. "Then we burn together, uncle," Vittorio replied, his voice grim. "It's a fitting end for the sons of the Moretti brothers." Salvatore raised his weapon, real fear finally breaking through his arrogance. "I'm not going to die here with you. I still have connections, resources that you don't know about." His words were cut short by 3 precise shots, not from Vittorio, but from behind Salvatore. The older Moretti fell forward, blood spreading across his expensive suit, his face frozen in a look of surprise. Behind him stood Marco Bianca, Vittorio's consigliere, pale from his escape from the hospital, but steady as he lowered his smoking gun. "For Antonio Moretti," the older man said quietly, "a debt that was 25 years overdue." Vittorio stared at his fallen uncle, the man who had caused so much pain and betrayal, now just another body in the long, bloody history of their family. He didn't feel any satisfaction, just a hollow sense of justice that had been delayed for too long. "The building is coming down," Marco warned, nodding toward the spreading flames. "Your sister and Isabella are heading for the tunnel." Vittorio nodded. "Get our men out. I'll meet you at the backup location." They separated, with Marco going to find the remaining Moretti soldiers, while Vittorio raced toward the tunnel entrance. Smoke was starting to fill the lower levels, the old timbers of the building fueling the growing fire. He found Isabella and Maria at the tunnel entrance, Maria refusing to go down without knowing that her brother was following. "Vittorio!" she cried with relief, throwing herself into his arms despite her normal composure. "Salvatore's dead," Vittorio said simply. "Marco found us. It's over." The siblings hugged briefly before Vittorio urged them into the tunnel, the roar of the fire growing louder behind them. As they moved through the narrow passage, the building above them groaned and shifted, structural supports starting to collapse under the heat of the flames. "Faster," Vittorio ordered, taking up the rear as debris started falling through cracks in the tunnel ceiling. They came out of the riverside entrance just as a huge section of the distillery collapsed inward, flames shooting up into the sky in a fiery tribute to Salvatore Moretti and the corrupt empire he had tried to build. From their spot on the shoreline, they watched as fire trucks and police cars arrived on the scene, sirens screaming through the night. The Moretti Empire was indeed in flames, but not in the way Salvatore had planned. "What now?" Maria asked, her voice quiet but determined as she looked at her brother. Vittorio's gaze went from the burning building to Isabella, who was standing a little apart from them, watching him with an unreadable look on her face. In the firelight, he saw not just the woman who had risked everything to bring him the truth, but also a reflection of his own father's vision for the Moretti legacy, built on honor as much as on power, on loyalty as much as on fear. "Now we rebuild," he said quietly. "The right way." As they walked away from the destruction toward the waiting car where Marco and the loyal Capos would meet them, Vittorio knew that the toughest battles were still to come. The commission meeting, the Duca threat, the purging of traitors from his organization, all of that would require strength and strategy. But for the first time since his father's death, Don Vittorio Moretti felt the clarity of purpose that came with knowing the truth. And walking beside him was the woman who had made that possible. Isabella Vega, granddaughter of Angelo Visconti, who had kept faith with Antonio Moretti's memory through decades of exile and silence. The night air smelled of smoke and destruction, but also of the promise of renewal. An empire in flames could rise again, forged stronger in the fires of betrayal and vindication. The safe house in Staten Island was buzzing with nervous energy as Vittorio prepared for the commission meeting. It had only been 2 hours since the distillery went up in flames, barely enough time to regroup and come up with a strategy for what was about to happen. Maria had been taken to a safe location upstate, escorted by Vittorio's most trusted guards. Now, in the living room of the unassuming waterfront house, the remaining loyal members of the Moretti organization were waiting for their leader's instructions. Marco Bianca, still pale from his injuries but resolute, was going over the evidence from Angelo Visconti's files. 3 capos, Franco's younger brother, Enzo, the veteran soldier Dominic Russo, and the calculating Pietro Zanetti, represented all that was left of Vittorio's inner circle after the day's bloodshed. Isabella was standing by the window, looking at the lights of Manhattan across the harbor. She had changed out of her smoke-damaged clothes and into a simple black dress that she had borrowed from the safe house's supplies. It was appropriate attire for the serious occasion that would decide the fate of the Moretti family. "The commission is going to expect weakness," Marco said, looking up from the documents. "They're going to think that losing Salvatore and so many of our captains has made us vulnerable." "Let them," Vittorio replied, adjusting the cufflinks on his immaculate suit, a man preparing for war in the uniform of his choosing. His shoulder had been bandaged where Salvatore's bullet had grazed him, the wound hidden beneath his tailored jacket. He couldn't show any sign of weakness tonight, not in front of the heads of New York's 5 most powerful crime families. "Our position is stronger than they realize," Pietro added. "The evidence against Salvatore proves that he not only betrayed the Moretti family, but also broke commission rules by making unauthorized deals with the Ducas." Vittorio nodded, his face grave. "The Ducas are still our biggest threat. After tonight's meeting, they're going to realize that their man on the inside is gone. They're going to move fast to take advantage of our perceived weakness." "Unless we move first," Enzo suggested, the desire for revenge for his brother's death clear in his voice. "Patience," Vittorio cautioned. "First, we secure our position with the commission. Then we'll take care of the Duca problem permanently." Throughout the strategy session, Isabella stayed quiet, observing the inner workings of a world that few outsiders ever got to see. Vittorio was very aware of her presence, the linguist who had somehow found her way into the heart of his organization and, against all odds, had proven herself to be trustworthy in the face of betrayal and violence. As the meeting ended and the men went off to make their final preparations, Vittorio went to stand by Isabella at the window. "You don't have to come tonight," he said quietly. "Your grandfather's obligation has been taken care of. You've done more than enough." Isabella turned away from the view of the harbor, her face determined. "My grandfather spent 25 years in exile, carrying the weight of your father's trust. I didn't come this far to miss the end. The commission meeting is no place for outsiders," Vittorio warned. "These men are dangerous and suspicious by nature. Your presence could be misinterpreted." "Then give me a role that makes sense," she countered. "I speak 6 languages better than any translator they could hire. Introduce me as your diplomatic advisor, someone who helps you with international business deals." Vittorio looked at her with a new appreciation. In less than a week, this woman had shown more loyalty, courage, and strategic thinking than men who had served him for years. "Why are you still here, Isabella?" he asked her directly. "The danger has only gotten worse. You could walk away, go back to your old life, your career." For the first time, a hint of uncertainty crossed her face. "Would you believe me if I said that I feel like I have to see this through to the end?" "No," Vittorio replied with unexpected gentleness. "I think you're here for the same reason that I haven't sent you away, something that neither of us expected when you spoke those words in my family's code." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken understanding, a connection that had been forged through shared danger and reluctant trust, and was now turning into something that neither of them had expected. Before Isabella could answer, Marco appeared in the doorway. "It's time, boss. Our escort is ready." Vittorio held Isabella's gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "You'll come as my advisor. Stay close to Marco, and don't say anything unless you're spoken to directly." The commission meeting was being held in an old Italian social club in a quiet corner of Staten Island, neutral ground by long-standing agreement. As Vittorio's convoy approached, the streets around the building were conspicuously empty. The local residents had learned over the years to disappear when certain black cars showed up in their neighborhood. The security was elaborate but discreet. Each family was allowed 3 representatives, the boss, the consigliere, and 1 capo. Weapons were checked at the entrance, a formality more than anything else, since everyone there knew a dozen different ways to kill without using conventional weapons. Inside, the main room had been set up with a large oval table, with 5 seats clearly marked for the bosses of the 5 families that controlled the organized crime in New York. The heads of each family were present. As Torrio entered, flanked by Marco and Enzo, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, their gazes weighing the Moretti heir whose organization had been so violently shaken. Isabella followed just behind him, drawing curious and suspicious glances. Torrio registered with a grim satisfaction that none of Salvatore's allies seemed surprised by his survival. His uncle clearly hadn't had the chance to inform them about their confrontation at the distillery before he'd met his end. Don Calabrese, an imposing figure in his 60s with a thick head of steel-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice, was the first to speak. "Don Moretti, we were expecting your uncle to represent the Moretti family tonight." "My uncle is dead," Torrio stated simply, taking the seat reserved for his family. "His betrayal of our family has been addressed according to our traditions." A wave of murmurs swept through the room as the other bosses exchanged knowing glances, rapidly recalculating the alliances and power dynamics in light of this sudden revelation. Don Lisi, the oldest present at 78, leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Serious accusations require serious evidence. Young Moretti. Salvatore was respected among us for many years. As was my father before him," Torrio countered smoothly, signaling to Marco to distribute folders to each family head. "These documents detail 25 years of betrayal, not just against the Moretti family, but against the very rules and territories the commission is meant to protect." As the other bosses began reviewing the evidence, financial records, intercepted communications, and witness statements meticulously compiled by Angelo Viscanti, Torrio couldn't help but notice Don Duca's growing discomfort. The Chicago interloper, a heavy-set man with a perpetual sneer etched on his face, shifted uneasily in his seat, his eyes darting nervously toward his consigliere. "These papers prove absolutely nothing," Duca declared, pushing the folder away dismissively. "They're just old transactions, business dealings between associates. There's nothing here that justifies executing a respected family leader without the commission's explicit approval." "Perhaps this will be more convincing," Torrio replied, with a curt nod to Marco, who placed a small, unassuming recorder on the table. "My father's own words, recorded just 3 days before his murder." The playback of Antonio Moretti's voice, clearly identifying Salvatore's treachery and his illicit arrangement with the Ducas, hung heavy in the air, creating a profound and absolute silence. Even the most hardened bosses in the room recognized the significance of hearing a dead man name his killer, especially when that killer was his own brother. When the recording finally ended, it was Don Calabrese who broke the silence. "The Moretti family's internal business is your own, Torrio, but Salvatore's arrangement with the Ducas represents a clear violation of our territorial agreements. This affects all of us." Don Lisi nodded slowly in agreement. "The commission has rules for a reason. Salvatore's actions threaten the delicate balance we all work so hard to maintain." Torrio's gaze moved deliberately, locking onto Don Duca. "Which brings us to the matter of Chicago's unauthorized expansion into New York territories. An expansion facilitated by my uncle's betrayal, but clearly orchestrated by others seated at this table." Duca's face flushed with barely controlled anger. "Watch your accusations, boy. You may have managed to eliminate Salvatore, but the Duca family is not so easily intimidated." "This isn't about intimidation, Don Duca," Torrio replied, his voice dangerously calm. "This is about consequences. Your arrangement with my uncle died with him. You have 24 hours to withdraw all Duca operations from New York territories and provide appropriate compensation for the men lost due to your interference." Duca let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "You're in no position to make demands, Moretti. Your organization is in shambles. Your captains are dead or scattered. You sit here with a translator and two old men, trying to project a strength you no longer possess. Isabella, who had remained silent and observant throughout the proceedings, suddenly spoke in flawless Italian, translating Don Calabresi's whispered comment to his consigliere. The comment suggested he found Duca's arrogance particularly distasteful. Duca turned to her in surprise, his unease growing as she switched to Russian, translating another hushed exchange between Lisi's men. My advisor, Miss Vega, Torrio introduced with a subtle hint of pride, is fluent in 10 languages, including the private conversations happening around this table. The demonstration had its intended effect, creating a palpable sense of discomfort among those who had assumed their aides were safely shielded by language barriers. Isabella's serene smile conveyed a clear warning. Nothing spoken in this room was truly private. Don Calabresi cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Don Moretti's terms seem reasonable, considering the evidence presented. The Duca expansion violated long-standing territorial agreements. Agreed, Don Lisi added, his ancient eyes still sharp despite his age. Chicago has overreached. The Commission supports Moretti's right to defend his legitimate territories. Duca looked around the table, realizing he had lost the crucial support he needed. This isn't over, Moretti, he snarled, rising abruptly from his seat. You'll regret making an enemy of the Duca family. I already regret the time wasted on this conversation, Torrio replied calmly. 22 hours, Don Duca. After that, we'll discuss this matter in a different language entirely. After Duca stormed out of the room, the remaining commission members turned to address other business. The redistribution of certain Moretti territories that had been compromised during Salvatore's betrayal, reassuring legitimate business partners who might be unsettled by the recent violence, and the delicate matter of law enforcement attention following the distillery fire. Throughout the proceedings, Torrio demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned his father's respect decades earlier. Decisive without being impulsive, firm without being inflexible, respectful of tradition while remaining pragmatic about necessary changes. By the meeting's conclusion, what had begun as a tribunal for a weakened organization had transformed into a resounding recognition of Torrio Moretti's legitimate claim to his family's legacy. The other bosses departed with a newfound respect for Antonio Moretti's son, and a clear understanding that the Moretti family would not be easily dismantled, despite Salvatore's best efforts. As they returned to their vehicles, Marco squeezed Torrio's shoulder. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. You've done what he never had the chance to do, exposed Salvatore and reclaimed our family's honor. We're not finished yet, Torrio replied, his expression hardening. Duca will retaliate. We need to be prepared. Already in motion, Enzo assured him. Our men are securing all critical properties. Additional security has been assigned to Maria and other family members. Nothing will catch us unprepared again. During the drive back to the main Moretti compound in Manhattan, the first time Torrio had returned to his official residence since the crisis began, he found himself seated beside Isabella, a moment of unexpected privacy created by the partition separating them from the front seat. You were impressive tonight, he acknowledged. The language demonstration was particularly effective. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. 5 years at the UN taught me that nothing unsettles powerful men more than realizing their private comments aren't so private. What happens now? Torrio asked, the question encompassing far more than the immediate tactical concerns. Your grandfather's mission is complete. Your debt to my father is paid. Isabella studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. In my grandfather's final days, he told me something I haven't shared until now. He said Antonio Moretti once told him that, if anything ever happened to him, he wanted Angelo to guide his son, to help him become the leader the family needed, not just the boss it would follow. And now, Torrio prompted, aware of the subtle shift in the air between them. Now I see what my grandfather saw. The son of Antonio Moretti, worthy of the legacy he carries. Her eyes held his with surprising intensity. The question isn't what happens with me, Torrio. It's whether you're ready to accept what's already happening between us. The car slowed as they approached the Moretti compound, the security gates opening to admit them to the fortress-like mansion that had served as the family's headquarters for 3 generations. Outside, the first faint light of dawn was breaking over the Manhattan skyline, a symbolic timing for the new era that was about to begin for the Moretti organization. "I was raised to believe attachments are a weakness," Torrio said quietly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. "My father lost his life because he trusted family. His own brother betrayed him, killed him, nearly destroyed everything he built. And yet you risked everything to save your sister," Isabella countered, her voice soft but firm. "Because some bonds strengthen, rather than weaken." As the car finally stopped in the courtyard, Torrio made no move to exit. Instead, he turned fully toward her, his gaze intense. "Stay," he said simply. "Not because of your grandfather's obligation or your linguistic skills. Stay because I want you here. Because I trust you in ways I haven't trusted anyone since my father's death." Isabella's composure finally softened, a hint of vulnerability showing through her carefully constructed exterior. "The world you're offering isn't one I ever expected to enter. It's dangerous, complicated." "It's my world," Torrio interrupted gently. "And after these past days, I think perhaps it's become yours too." Their moment was interrupted as the doors opened, Marco appearing with urgent updates requiring immediate attention. The Dukas were already withdrawing from the contested territories. Though intelligence suggested they were merely regrouping rather than surrendering, key captains loyal to Salvatore had been identified and contained. The organization was stabilizing faster than expected, loyalty to Antonio Moretti's son proving stronger than Salvatore's machinations. Throughout the day that followed, as Torrio systematically reclaimed control of his empire, Isabella remained by his side, observing, occasionally advising, her very presence a constant reminder of the truth that had almost been buried forever. Her linguistic skills proved invaluable as international associates were reassured, her analytical mind offering fresh perspectives on organizational weaknesses that Salvatore had exploited. That evening, as sunset painted the Manhattan skyline in hues of gold and crimson, Torrio found Isabella on the terrace of his penthouse, gazing out at the city that had been his family's domain for generations. "The Dukas have crossed back into Chicago territory," he informed her, joining her at the railing. "Their New York operations have been completely dismantled. Our informants report Don Duca is facing some serious questions from his own captains about his failed expansion." "It's not over," she observed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Men like Duca don't forgive humiliation." "No," Torrio agreed, "but neither do I. When he returns, and he will be ready." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind possible only between people who had faced death together and emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. Finally, Isabella turned to face him fully, her expression resolute. "I've been thinking about my grandfather," she said. "He spent 25 years in exile, carrying the burden of your father's trust, knowing the truth but unable to act on it. His entire life became defined by a promise made to Antonio Moretti. Promise now fulfilled." Torrio nodded in acknowledgement. "Yes." Isabella's eyes met his with newfound certainty. "Which means I'm finally free to make my own choices, to forge my own connection to the Moretti family. Not through obligation or history, but through choice." Torrio took her hand, the gesture startlingly intimate from a man whose touch usually signaled either threat or final judgment. "And what choice do you make, Isabella Vega?" "To stay," she replied simply. "Not as Angelo Visconti's granddaughter, but as myself, to help rebuild what was nearly destroyed, to stand beside the man who reclaimed his father's legacy." "It won't be easy," Torrio warned, though his hand remained clasped firmly with hers. "The life I lead comes with dangers few can imagine, responsibilities fewer still can bear." "I've seen your world at its worst," Isabella reminded him. "The betrayal, the violence, the constant vigilance. But I've also seen what it could be under the right leadership, your leadership." As the last light of day faded into the Manhattan night, Don Torrio Moretti made a decision that would reshape not just his personal future, but the destiny of his entire organization. Pulling Isabella gently toward him, He sealed their new alliance with a kiss that carried the weight of everything they had endured together. The danger, the truth, the unexpected bond forged in the crucible of family loyalty and personal choice. When they parted, Torio's expression held a rare vulnerability, visible only to the woman who had earned not just his trust, but his heart. "My father believed family was everything," he said softly. "Perhaps it's time to expand what family means." Isabella smiled, her eyes sparkling with affection. "La familia, tutto languin aqua," she quoted. The phrase that had begun their dangerous journey now transformed into a promise for the future. Family is everything. Blood is not water. In the penthouse high above a city that bore the invisible imprint of generations of Moretti influence, a new chapter began. Not just for Torio and Isabella, but for an empire reborn from betrayal's ashes, stronger for the truth that had nearly been lost forever, and guided by the unexpected partnership of a Mafia don and the linguist who had spoken his family's secret code with perfect, destiny-altering precision.